I never imagined I'd find myself caught in the middle of a neighborhood drama. But life has a funny way of surprising you. It all started on what seemed like an ordinary Saturday morning. The sun was shining brightly, and there was a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. My wife, Sarah, and I had just finished breakfast when we decided it was finally time to tackle our backyard. We had moved into this cozy suburban neighborhood about 6 months earlier, and while everything else about our new home felt perfect, the backyard was a mess. Overgrown weeds, patchy grass, and a few sad-looking bushes were all that greeted us whenever we stepped outside. We weren't looking to do anything extravagant, just enough to make the space feel inviting and functional. Maybe somewhere we could sit in the evenings or host small gatherings with friends. So we hired a local landscaper who came highly recommended by one of our neighbors. They promised to transform our wild jungle into a peaceful retreat. The plan included flower beds bursting with color, a small stone patio for seating, and even a tiny water feature, a little fountain that bubbled softly. It sounded dreamy, and as the crew worked their magic over the next couple of days, Sarah and I couldn't help but feel excited. One afternoon, as I stood watching the progress, I noticed someone peeking over the fence from the neighboring yard. It was Mr. Peterson, an older gentleman who lived next door. He was known around the neighborhood for his perfectly manicured lawn and neatly trimmed hedges. His property looked like something out of a magazine, so naturally I assumed he'd appreciate our efforts too. He nodded approvingly as he sipped his tea, giving me a small wave before disappearing back inside his house. That moment made me feel good. It was like getting a silent stamp of approval from the unofficial king of curb appeal. But things took a sharp turn later that evening. Just as Sarah and I were settling into our newly decorated outdoor space, enjoying the soft glow of string lights we'd hung above the patio, there was a knock at the door. Standing on our porch was Mrs. Langley, the president of our homeowners association, or HOA for short. She wasn't exactly the warmest person in the world. Her reputation preceded her. Everyone knew she ran the HOA with an iron fist, enforcing every rule down to the last detail. And now, here she was, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression that could freeze boiling water. "Good evening," she said, her tone clipped and businesslike. "We need to discuss your recent landscaping project." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Project. All we'd done was clean up a neglected yard. Still, I tried to stay calm. "Oh, sure," I replied, gesturing for her to come in. But she didn't budge. Instead, she launched into a list of complaints. Apparently, our flower beds were too colorful and clashed with the HOA's approved color scheme, which consisted mostly of dull greens and browns. The water feature, too noisy, even though it barely made a sound. And those charming string lights. Well, they were considered festive decorations, which apparently weren't allowed unless it was a holiday. Sarah and I listened in stunned silence. How had we gone from proud homeowners to rule breakers overnight? When Mrs. Langley finally paused for breath, I managed to stammer out a response. "Look, we didn't mean to cause any trouble. We were just trying to improve the space." "Well, you should have checked the guidelines first," she shot back, tapping her pen against the clipboard for emphasis. "Any changes require prior approval from the board. You'll need to submit a formal request if you want to keep any of this." As she turned to leave, I felt a mix between frustration and disbelief bubbling inside me. What kind of place had we moved into? Wasn't this supposed to be our home? For the rest of the night, Sarah and I sat in silence, staring at the beautiful yet controversial yard we created. Something told me this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. The next morning, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table with cups of coffee, trying to make sense of what had happened. Mrs. Langley's visit still felt surreal, like something out of a bad dream. We hadn't even known there was an HOA handbook when we bought the house. Our real estate agent had assured us it was a formality, and that the neighborhood was very relaxed. Clearly, that wasn't true. So, after some hesitation, I decided to dig up the rules ourselves. It didn't take long to find the dreaded document online. It was posted on the HOA's website, buried under layers of tabs and links. As I scrolled through the pages, my jaw dropped lower with every line. The guidelines weren't just strict. They were absurdly detailed. Everything from the color of your front door to the type of mailbox you could have was regulated. Even the height of shrubs and flowers in your yard had to meet specific measurements. It was as if someone had taken the concept of uniformity and turned it into a dictatorship. Sarah leaned over my shoulder, reading along. "This can't be real," she muttered. "Who cares if our flower beds are too colorful? They're beautiful." I agreed, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about aesthetics. These rules represented control, an attempt to mold everyone into cookie-cutter versions of each other. And while part of me wanted to rebel against them completely, another part worried about the consequences. What would happen if we ignored the HOA? Would they fine us? Sue us? Put a lion on our house? The thought sent chills down my spine. Still, giving up without a fight didn't sit right with me either. This backyard meant more than just grass and flowers. It symbolized our effort to create a home that reflected who we were. If we let the HOA dictate every little detail, wouldn't we lose a piece of ourselves in the process? Over the next few days, we did our best to comply, or at least appear like we were. We removed the string lights, which broke my heart, and drained the water feature temporarily. But the flower beds stayed put. There was no way we were ripping those out. They were the highlight of the entire project. Instead, I drafted a polite email to Mrs. Langley explaining our situation and asking for clarification on the rules. Maybe, just maybe, reason would prevail. Her response came quickly, but it wasn't what I'd hoped for. In fact, it was worse. She attached a formal letter stating that unless we made all required changes within 30 days, we'd face penalties starting at $100 per violation. That's when I realized how serious this was. Each infraction, the flowers, the fountain, the lights, was considered a separate offense. If we didn't fix everything, we could rack up fines faster than we could pay them off. Feeling defeated, I called Sarah into the living room to show her the email. She sighed heavily, sinking onto the couch beside me. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't imagine tearing everything apart. It feels wrong." As we sat there, staring blankly at the screen, I noticed something strange outside. A few neighbors were gathered near the curb, whispering among themselves. At first, I thought nothing of it. People often chatted during evening walks, but then one of them glanced toward our house. When they saw me looking, they quickly turned away. "Do you think they're talking about us?" Sarah whispered. "It's possible," I said grimly. "Word travels fast around here." That night, I lay awake thinking about everything. Was this really worth fighting for? Or should we cut our losses and conform? The HOA seemed untouchable, their rules etched in stone. But something inside me refused to back down entirely. I couldn't shake the feeling that if enough people felt the same way, maybe, just maybe, we could push back against the system. Little did I know, the battle was only beginning. By the next morning, it was clear that our backyard drama had become the talk of the neighborhood. As I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, I noticed Mrs. Thompson from across the street giving me a sympathetic smile before quickly averting her gaze. A little further down, two neighbors were deep in conversation, their heads turning toward our house every few seconds. It was uncomfortable, like being the main character in a soap opera you didn't sign up for. I tried to brush it off and focus on what mattered, figuring out our next move. But as the day went on, curiosity got the better of me. Were people taking sides? Did they agree with the HOA's ironclad rules, or did they think we were justified in standing our ground? To find out, I decided to do something bold. I'd start talking to them. The first person I approached was Mr. Peterson, our neighbor with the picture-perfect lawn. He had seemed approving when he watched the landscaping crew work, so I thought maybe he'd be on our side. I knocked on his door, and after a moment he answered, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and looking slightly surprised to see me. "Morning, Mr. Peterson," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Got a minute?" He nodded hesitantly and invited me onto his porch. After exchanging pleasantries about the weather and how nice his roses looked, I brought up the elephant in the room. "So I heard some folks are talking about our backyard situation," I said casually. "What's your take on it?" Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, son, I'm not sure it's my place to say," he began, trailing off. "The HOA does have its reasons for those rules." His non-answer stung more than I expected. Here was someone who lived right next door, someone whose opinion I valued, and he couldn't even muster a word of support. I thanked him politely and left, feeling more isolated than ever. But not everyone reacted the same way. Later that evening, as Sarah and I were unpacking groceries, there was a knock at the door. Standing there were the Martinez family, our neighbors from across the street. They introduced themselves warmly and invited us over for dinner. Hesitant but curious, we accepted. Over plates of homemade enchiladas and fresh guacamole, the conversation turned to the HOA. Mrs. Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious. "We've been through something similar," she confessed. "When we painted our front door red last year, the HOA nearly had a meltdown. We ended up having to repaint it beige, which honestly broke my heart." Her husband chimed in, shaking his head. "It's exhausting, dealing with them. Every little thing becomes a battle. You'd think they'd care more about making the neighborhood feel welcoming instead of policing everyone's choices." Their story resonated deeply with me. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt less alone. These weren't just random neighbors. They were kindred spirits who understood exactly what we were going through. And yet, despite their empathy, they also offered a sobering piece of advice. "Be careful if you decide to fight back," Mrs. Martinez warned. "They don't take defiance lightly. One wrong move, and you could end up with fines, or worse." Her words hung heavy in the air, but they also sparked something inside me. If enough people felt frustrated by the HOA's grip, why couldn't we band together? Maybe unity was the key to tipping the scales in our favor. As we walked home later that night, Sarah squeezed my hand. "Do you think we can really change anything?" she asked softly. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'd rather try than give up without a fight." And with that, a seed of hope planted itself firmly in my mind. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but perhaps solidarity would give us the strength we needed to stand up, not just for ourselves, but for everyone tired of living under such rigid control. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and Sarah and I woke up with a mix of nerves and determination. We had spent hours preparing for this moment, reviewing our proposal, practicing what we would say, and mentally bracing ourselves for whatever might come our way. The stakes felt impossibly high. This wasn't just about saving our backyard. It was about proving that change could happen if people were willing to stand together. As we walked toward the clubhouse that evening, the air was thick with anticipation. Neighbors trickled in one by one, some looking eager, others uneasy. Mrs. Langley stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, greeting everyone with her usual formal smile. When she spotted us, her expression tightened ever so slightly, but she nodded curtly before turning her attention to someone else. It was clear she meant business tonight. Inside, the room buzzed with quiet chatter. Folding chairs lined the space, each one quickly filling up as more people arrived. For a neighborhood known for its low turnout at meetings, this crowd was unusually large. Some faces were familiar, like Mr. Peterson, who gave us a polite nod. But others belonged to neighbors we rarely saw outside their houses. Word had clearly spread about the proposed changes, and curiosity had drawn them here. Mrs. Langley called the meeting to order with a firm tap of her gavel. She began by going over recent updates and infractions, her tone clipped and authoritative. Then, without missing a beat, she launched into a fiery speech defending the current guidelines. "These rules exist for a reason," she declared, pacing slowly in front of the group. They protect property values, maintain consistency, and ensure that our neighborhood remains a desirable place to live. If we start making exceptions, where does it end? Chaos. That's where. Her words hung heavy in the air, and a few heads nodded in agreement. But not everyone looked convinced. One woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while another scribbled something on a notepad. Sensing an opportunity, I leaned forward, ready to respond when the floor opened for discussion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Langley turned to us. "Mr. Wilson, you may present your case now." My heart raced as I stood up, clutching a folder filled with notes and copies of our proposal. Every eye in the room was on me, and for a split second, I wondered if I'd freeze under the pressure. But then I caught sight of Sarah, sitting quietly with an encouraging smile, and I remembered why we were doing this. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the center of the room. "Thank you, Mrs. Langley," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "I understand the importance of maintaining standards. Consistency is valuable. It gives neighborhoods character and appeal. But there's a difference between consistency and control. Our current rules don't just guide us. They limit us. They tell us what colors we can use, what sounds we can hear, and even how much joy we're allowed to bring into our own spaces." I paused, letting my words sink in. A few people exchanged glances, while others nodded thoughtfully. Encouraged, I continued. "This isn't about breaking rules for the sake of rebellion. It's about finding balance. Our homes are reflections of who we are. Shouldn't we have the freedom to express that? By updating these guidelines, we're not throwing out structure. We're creating room for creativity and individuality. And that benefits everyone." When I finished speaking, the room fell silent. For a moment, no one moved or said a word. Then, slowly, a woman in the back raised her hand. It was Mrs. Carter, the same neighbor who had painted her door, blue only to be forced to repaint it beige. "I think Mr. Wilson makes a good point," she said hesitantly, glancing around the room. "These rules do feel outdated. Maybe it's time we reconsidered them." Her comments sparked a ripple effect. Others began chiming in, sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's strict policies. One man talked about being fined for planting marigolds because they were too bright. Another mentioned how the ban on outdoor lighting made holidays feel less festive. Each story added weight to our argument, chipping away at the resistance. But not everyone was swayed. A few residents pushed back, echoing Mrs. Langley's warnings about setting dangerous precedents. Tensions flared briefly, but overall, the mood remained constructive. People were finally talking, not shouting, and that gave me hope. By the end of the discussion, it was clear that opinions were divided. Whether or not our proposal passed, we had succeeded in sparking a conversation. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time, it felt within reach. As Sarah and I left the clubhouse that night, hand in hand, I knew we had planted seeds of possibility. The battle wasn't over, but the tide was beginning to turn. The days leading up to the HOA meeting felt like a whirlwind. With Mr. Thompson's guidance, we worked tirelessly on our proposal, determined to present a case that was both logical and compelling. We wanted to show the board, and the rest of the neighborhood, that change wasn't something to fear. It could enhance our community, not harm it. Our plan included expanding the approved color palette for landscaping, allowing small decorative lighting, and permitting low-noise water features. Each point was carefully worded to address concerns while still giving homeowners more freedom. But crafting the proposal was only half the battle. To strengthen our position, we needed support from other residents. So, Sarah and I spent hours knocking on doors, sharing our story, and explaining why these changes mattered. Some neighbors were hesitant at first, worried about rocking the boat or drawing Mrs. Langley's ire. Others, however, were eager to join the cause. The Martinez family became vocal advocates, helping us rally signatures for a petition. Even a few unexpected allies emerged, like young parents who wanted their kids to grow up in a neighborhood that felt lively rather than sterile. As the day of the meeting approached, nerves began to creep in. What if no one showed up? What if the board dismissed our efforts outright? I tried to push those thoughts aside, reminding myself that we had done everything we could. Still, the uncertainty loomed over us like a storm cloud. Finally, the evening of the meeting arrived. The community clubhouse buzzed with energy as neighbors filed in, filling the rows of folding chairs. For once, attendance was unusually high, a mix of curious onlookers, staunch supporters of the status quo, and those secretly rooting for change. Sarah and I sat near the front, clutching copies of our proposal and bracing ourselves for what lay ahead. Mrs. Langley opened the meeting with her usual air of authority, updating everyone on recent infractions and reiterating the importance of maintaining standards. Her tone made it clear she viewed our backyard as a threat to the neighborhood's harmony. When she finally turned the floor over to us, my heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Taking a deep breath, I stood up and walked to the center of the room. Dozens of eyes followed me, some skeptical, others encouraging. I started by thanking everyone for coming, then launched into our presentation. I understand the value of guidelines, I began, speaking slowly to steady my voice. They help create consistency and ensure property values stay strong. But when rules become too restrictive, they stifle creativity and individuality. This isn't just about flower beds or string lights. It's about giving people the freedom to make their homes truly theirs. I went on to explain how our proposed changes would benefit the neighborhood. More colorful gardens would add vibrancy and charm. Decorative lighting could improve safety and ambience. Small water features would bring tranquility without causing disturbances. As I spoke, I noticed subtle shifts in body language. Heads nodding, faces softening. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before someone raised their hand. It was Mrs. Carter, a quiet woman who rarely attended meetings. "I think this sounds reasonable," she said cautiously. "Our current rules feel outdated. Maybe it's time for an update." Her comment sparked a ripple effect. Other neighbors chimed in, sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's rigidity. One man talked about how he'd been fined for planting marigolds that were too bright. Another mentioned how the ban on outdoor string lights made holidays feel less festive. The room grew livelier, opinions bouncing back and forth. Of course, not everyone agreed. A few die-hard traditionalists argued passionately against any changes, echoing Mrs. Langley's warnings about setting dangerous precedents. Tensions flared briefly, but overall, the mood remained constructive. People were finally talking, not shouting, and that gave me hope. By the end of the discussion, it was clear the tide was shifting. Whether or not our proposal passed, we had succeeded in sparking a conversation. The final vote would happen at the next meeting, but for now, we had planted seeds of change. As Sarah and I left the clubhouse that night, hand in hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to all of us. The wait for the final vote felt like an eternity. In the days following the first meeting, the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Conversations about our proposal spilled over into driveways, parks, and even grocery store aisles. Some neighbors approached us with words of encouragement, while others shot us wary glances, unsure of where they stood in this growing divide. Flyers began appearing on mailboxes, some supporting our cause, others urging residents to protect community standards. It was clear that Mrs. Langley and her allies weren't going down without a fight. Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah and I tried to stay focused. We continued gathering support, answering questions from curious neighbors, and addressing concerns. Mr. Thompson proved invaluable during this time, offering legal insights and helping us refine our arguments. His calm demeanor kept us grounded when frustration threatened to take over. Even the Martinez family pitched in, hosting a small gathering at their house to discuss strategy with other supporters. Slowly but surely, we built a coalition of voices ready to stand up for change. When the day of the final meeting finally arrived, the atmosphere was electric. The clubhouse filled quickly, with every chair occupied, and some people standing along the walls. There was a palpable sense of tension in the air, as if everyone knew this decision would shape the future of our neighborhood. Sarah squeezed my hand tightly as we took our seats near the front. Across the room, Mrs. Langley sat stiffly, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Her usual confidence seemed shaken, perhaps sensing that the tide might be turning against her. After a brief introduction, she opened the floor for discussion. This time, the conversation flowed more freely, with both sides presenting their cases. Supporters of the current rules argued that loosening restrictions would lead to chaos, citing fears of loud noises, garish designs, and plummeting property values. But those in favor of change countered with logic and emotion, emphasizing how rigid rules stifled creativity and made the neighborhood feel less welcoming. Then came my turn to speak again. My palms were sweaty as I stood up, but I reminded myself why we were doing this, not just for our backyard, but for everyone who deserved a little freedom. This isn't about breaking rules for the sake of rebellion, I said, looking around the room. It's about finding balance. Our homes are reflections of ourselves. Shouldn't we have the right to express that? Yes, guidelines are important, but they shouldn't suffocate us. In the weeks that followed the meeting, a subtle but noticeable shift began to ripple through the neighborhood. The tension that had hung heavy in the air for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a newfound sense of possibility. Neighbors who once avoided each other's gaze now exchanged warm smiles and friendly waves. People started making small changes to their homes, things they'd been too afraid to do before. Mrs. Carter painted her front door a cheerful shade of robin's egg blue. The Rodriguez family installed twinkling string lights above their porch, creating a cozy glow at night. Even Mr. Peterson surprised us all by adding a row of vibrant yellow daffodils along his walkway. Sarah and I wasted no time reclaiming our backyard paradise. With the HOA's updated guidelines in place, we were finally free to bring our vision to life without fear of repercussions. We reinstalled the water feature, its gentle bubbling sound blending perfectly with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The flower beds burst into full bloom, painting the space with splashes of color that made it feel alive. And yes, those beloved string lights went back up, casting a golden hue over everything as evening fell. To celebrate the victory, and thank everyone who had supported us, we threw a backyard barbecue one Saturday afternoon. Invitations went out to nearly every household on the block, including some of our fiercest critics from the HOA. At first, I wasn't sure how many would show up, but to my surprise, the turnout was incredible. Tables groaned under platters of grilled burgers, fresh salads, and homemade desserts. Kids darted around playing tag while adults mingled, laughing and sharing stories. For the first time since moving here, it truly felt like a community. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the yard in soft twilight, I grabbed a microphone. Well, an old karaoke machine we borrowed, and tapped it lightly to get everyone's attention. The chatter quieted, and dozens of faces turned toward me. I just want to say thank you. I began, my voice cracking slightly with emotion. This past month has been, well, something none of us expected. But through it all, we came together, not just as neighbors, but as friends. Change isn't easy, especially when it challenges the way things have always been done. But because of your courage and support, we've taken a step toward building a neighborhood where everyone can feel proud to call home. Applause erupted, and several people raised their glasses in a toast. Sarah slipped her hand into mine, squeezing it gently. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and music beneath the twinkling string lights, I realized something profound. This fight hadn't just been about rules or regulations. It had been about connection, about breaking down walls, and reminding ourselves that we're stronger together than apart. Of course, not everything changed overnight. Mrs. Langley still kept a watchful eye on the neighborhood, though her grip had loosened considerably. Some residents remained cautious, sticking closely to the old ways, but even they couldn't deny the positive energy spreading throughout the streets. Front yards became canvases for creativity, and weekend gatherings became more frequent. Slowly but surely, our little corner of suburbia transformed into a place that felt less like a gated fortress and more like a true community. Looking back, I'm grateful for everything. The challenges, the victories, and even the moments of doubt. They taught me that standing up for what you believe in isn't always easy, but it's worth it. And sometimes, the smallest acts of defiance, like planting flowers or hanging string lights, can spark something much bigger than yourself. That night, as Sarah and I sat outside long after our guests had gone, sipping hot cocoa under a blanket of stars, I felt a deep sense of peace. Our backyard wasn't just a patch of grass anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, unity, and hope. Life had handed us lemons, sure, but with a little determination and a lot of help from our neighbors, we turned them into the sweetest lemonade imaginable.